Hello and welcome to The Rest is Politics US and this special series on January the 6th, 2021 and the riots at the US Capitol. This is the third episode. I'm Katty K.
And I'm Anthony Scaramucci. Katty, where were we, Katty? You had a cliffhanger moment in episode 2. So where are we going?
Well, we left you last week with Trump having just spent the last few months. He was trying to stay in power. It was all about stop the steal, trying to prevent Joe Biden's victory. He's had all of these court cases that he's brought unsuccessfully. He's tried to lean on his political opponents, people like Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, who we spoke about, to fiddle with the results. And now he's got to January the 6th. And he sees January the 6th as his last stand. He's trying to stop Congress from certifying the Electoral College results. And going into this day, it was pretty clear that Republicans in both the houses of Congress would challenge the results in Congress and try to stop the certification process. And the Democrats have been busily preparing their rebuttals against those challenges. So in today's episode, we are going to look at the events of January the 6th itself. The TikTok, what happened hour by hour as Donald Trump supporters came from all over America. They came from Arizona, Georgia, Ohio. I mean, really from all over the country. And they stormed the Capitol building, trying to undermine the very foundations of American democracy.
The erosion in support for President Trump comes as COVID-19 cases have been surging.
Joe Biden is back and taking aim at the current commander-in-chief.
Under this president, we become weaker, sicker, more divided, and more violent.
What if Biden wins?
Our constitutional rights are to remove a tyrannical government. I'm going to give it to you wrong. Yeah, we're violent.
We are getting ready for some big calls.
NBC News projecting as expected Joe Biden will win.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
The 700,000 votes Trump was ahead by disappeared.
We're going to walk down and I'll be there with you. You'll never take back our country with weakness.
Go, let's go! We have a breach of the Capitol. Where the fuck are they? He's got a gun!
They were peaceful people. These were great people.
Let me just say this, and I would love to get your reaction. So we go from the Tea Party movement after Obama comes into power. People are upset about the taxes and they're upset about the zero interest rate policies that are favoring the banks. We then go from Tea Party to Occupy Wall Street. So it's not just right wingers, it's now left wingers are railing on the government. You gave trillions of dollars away to the fat cat bankers. The rest of us are not doing as well. You then morph into MAGA. And Katty, you know this. Some of it is Bernie Sanders stuff. Mm-hmm. Some of it is Donald Trump stuff. It's like a Frankenstein monster has been created in the body politic. And then we go from MAGA to the government is lying to you and the elections are unfair. And the people are chanting, stop the steal. 31 million American adults, 31 million believe that the election was stolen. There's no evidence of it. Subsequently, Fox News is paying a $783 million settlement to one of the voting machine companies to not have to have their news stars deposed. No evidence of it.
Yeah, 61 separate court cases tossed out.
The Secretary of State of Georgia, who votes for Trump and does 3 recounts for him, tells him, no, there's no evidence of any massive fraud here. So before we get into the narrative, how do you get thousands of people to believe this bullshit? And how do you get them to show up at a rally on the Ellipse and then march on the Capitol and break windows and take a dump on Speaker Pelosi's desk? Go ahead. How do you do it, Katty? Because I'm trying to start a cult, by the way, and I need to know how to do this. So how do you do it?
I'm interested that you use the word bullshit because that's exactly the word that Donald Trump used on the Ellipse on that day, on January the 6th, to describe the election from his point of view. He said, we were winning, we had all of these votes ahead, and then it was bullshit. But I think it's people went down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and what they were reading online and what they were reading in different social media groups whipped them up. And that is why we got to the events of January the 6th. So going into January the 6th, let's have a quick look at where we are in all of the different factions. We've got the Republicans in the House, and it was here really that the congressional challenge began. And by this stage, it looked as if 140 Republican members of Congress would contest the election result. The Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, had said that he was going to get a team together on what he called voter fraud and integrity. And there was no doubt, really, in the White House. They knew that Kevin McCarthy was going to follow Donald Trump's wishes and push against the certification of the election result. The Republicans in the Senate were a little bit more divided. Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, he said that he was going to join those House members who were objecting to the certification. But there were a bigger group of Republican senators who also said that they wanted the vote certified, most notably, of course, Mitt Romney and also Mitch McConnell, who was the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. The Democrats, of course, in the Senate and in the House, they're united. They want to have the election results certified. They say Joe Biden has won, and they don't really trust Mitch McConnell. They're a little bit wary. Nancy Pelosi's a little bit wary of him. He said that he's going to certify the results, but, you know, there's not a lot of love between Mitch McConnell and many Democrats, and so she was a little bit wary about that. Joe Biden, he's holed up at his home in Wilmington, Delaware. Remember, it's still COVID. He's not out and about very much. And he is kind of waiting to see what Donald Trump is going to do. And Donald Trump, and he is the key figure this day, is set to give this speech. And it's called Save America. It's no longer Stop the Steal. This is now the Save America. He really does see this, you know, in the battle for America as he sees it. He sees this as the big last stand. January the 6th, the day that Congress is going to certify the election results. If they can't stop this certification from taking place, then he and MAGA have lost the election. That's his kind of feeling. So he's going to give this big speech on the ellipse, just on the south of the White House, outside the Washington Monument. And I think we should set the scene. I covered this day for the BBC. I was live on air for hours. And I'm going to be honest, I woke up that morning, and I don't know what you feel, Anthony, but I woke up that morning and I didn't think there was going to be a massive riot on the Hill. Did you? I mean, I didn't wake up thinking, oh my God, this is the day there's going to be war in America, or potentially the beginning of a civil war, or we're going to see the Capitol overrun. I mean, yeah, we all knew that January 6th was a big day, but maybe I just wasn't listening to the right kind of deep web online chatter, because I just thought it was going to be a big Donald Trump rally.
So I woke up, it was my 57th birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And by the way, I have the same birthday as Eric Trump. I think I've mentioned it already. And my wife got me a Bitcoin birthday cake, and I was super happy about it. And I ended up putting it on the cover of one of my books, but I had no clue. But before we get into this narrative, I want to do a character test with you. Ready? Mm-hmm. It's spineless or principled. Those are the answers, Katty K. Spineless or principled. Okay, ready? Mitch McConnell, spineless or principled?
Well, he did say he wanted to certify the election result.
All right, so we're going to go with principled on that one, even though he's an equivocator. We're going to say principled, okay? Kevin McCarthy.
Well, not so principled.
Okay, we're going to say spineless on that one, okay? Okay, we would say jellyfish, but that's not one of the two answers, okay? Now let's go to the last one, and then we can get into this narrative. Mike Pence, spineless or principled?
Mike Pence put himself and his family at risk that day.
He did.
And not just on that day, as we will tell during the course of this story.
No question.
For days and days and weeks and weeks and months and potentially years afterwards.
They still chant,
hang Mike Pence.
Yes, I don't even want to say it, but that's what they do. So Mike Pence principled. Mike Pence comes out of this thing and he says, my political career is likely over, but I do love my country. And there was no election fraud here, and we're certifying the election. But Trump says at the
ellipse, at the rally at the ellipse,
all we have to do is get Mike Pence to say that we have to bring it back to the states. And then you're happy, and I'm happy, and I get to stay in power. This son of a bitch is trying to overthrow the government. Now, we're going to pretend that didn't happen now because he's now been reelected president, Katty K. But that's what he was doing on that day. So take us to what happened.
I think that's why it's so important to tell this story again, because Donald Trump has been reelected. And America, in a way, kind of collectively decided to draw a veil over these events. But when you listen to them again, and I've spent the last few days watching documentaries, watching the coverage, listening to all of the voices of that day, I've been shocked all over again. So let's take us to about 10:30 in the morning, and you've got all of these different groups, buses and buses of crowds of people coming from all over the country to the Washington Mall. Trump supporters there to protest. You've got the Proud Boys, which is a far-right American militia group, walking down the mall, chanting, "Fight for Trump, save America, USA, USA." Some of them got baseball bats in their hands. And there is it's a mixture of a sort of, a big football game crowd and a little bit of menace in the air. And I knew this rally was happening. And I remember first thinking there could be trouble when I was in the Uber on the way to the studio, and I was listening to the rallies, and I was listening to Rudy Giuliani saying that you had to have trial by combat, and thinking that doesn't sound good. And then Trump comes on and he keeps repeating the word fight, and you've got to fight for America. And the kind of language that he was using, the repetition of that language, I thought this spells trouble. We hadn't woken up expecting it, but it was the tone of those speeches and the way he then at midday, so the crowd starts gathering in the morning. Some of them are getting there early. At midday, Donald Trump takes the stage in the Ellipse in front of this huge crowd. It's something like 53,000 people. He is thrilled. He says, "I'm so honored to have you all here to fight for me." Congress, meanwhile, a mile down the road, is due to start the procedure of certification of the election results at 1 p.m. in a joint session in the House, presided over by Vice President Mike Pence. If both the senators and the members of the House object to the results, then they would retire to their own chambers to discuss the results separately. So that's all happening up on Capitol Hill. Outside the White House, Donald Trump, who's, as we heard in the last 2 episodes, has been attacking the election procedure for months, has whipped up this crowd into a kind of frenzy of fury and revenge and excitement. I think that's worth pointing out, that there really is this kind of sense of excitement. There's one point where the Trump family is in a tent behind the podium, and Donald Trump Jr. shows a video of himself backstage in which he pans to his girlfriend, Kimberly Guilfoyle, by the way, quick aside, who's just been nominated to be ambassador to Athens, Greece, cradle of democracy. I mean, how ironic does that get?
What did the Greeks do to Trump to deserve that, though? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Of all the places they could be sending this woman, because what does she say in this video? She says, "Have the courage to do the right thing, fight." And then Trump goes up on the stage and he says, "Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down and I'll be with you there to the Capitol." And this is the crucial part. "And we fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore." And I think it's worth dwelling on that, because when we have the investigation in Congress afterwards, Anthony, into whether Donald Trump incited this riot, they keep referring to this. Do you think he meant to tell them to go and actually do what they did, to fight their way into the Capitol?
I do. And I think that's the incendiary language that he was using. And the real question is, how does he get other people to try to out-Trump Trump? He's got Rudy Giuliani saying that we need trial by combat.
Giuliani, who, of course, has been leading the legal challenges in many cases.
Yeah, but he's up on the stage saying trial by combat. I've got to out-Trump Trump. Katty K, how does Donald Trump get people to stand there and try to out-Trump him?
So I have one theory about this. I think some of the people, and it's interesting going back over the documentaries, some of the people who were there on the mall that day were there with a real intention to fight. There was one guy who called himself Joe from Ohio who was asked by an NPR reporter, "What do you want to happen today?" And he said, "I want all the members of Congress who certify this election to be hanging from gallows, tried and hung for treason." And he's super graphic. "I want them hung 4 by 4 by 4, hung so the country can see." I mean, there is no doubt that that guy was there with an intention to overturn the election result and to enact retribution and, as he says, to enact violence against members of Congress. We know from Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, and she was the aide to Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, and she testified before the January the 6th committee, that Donald Trump knew before he took to the stage at midday at the Ellipse that there were members of the crowd who had arms and weapons. And he said, I don't care. Let them in. They shouldn't have to go through security gates. They're not there to do any harm to me. So that already was something that came up later. He knew they were armed. He knew they had weapons, and yet he's still kind of trying to get them up into the mob. In answer to your question, I think part of it is that yes, there are people there with a clear intention to commit violence who have come there with a very specific purpose, who are organized. We know this from intelligence reports afterwards. People like the Proud Boys, the militia group, the Oath Keepers, the militia group. But as I was watching it on television unfold, I couldn't help but think this crowd is 90% male and 90% white. And partly what was happening was the kind of mob mentality kicks in. You get a big crowd of people together, of young men together, older men in some cases, but you get this big crowd together and Trump is whipping them up and Rudy Giuliani is whipping them up. And they just kind of get themselves into this frenzy. And at 12:53, even while Donald Trump is still speaking, so Donald Trump's up at the Ellipse still speaking, some of the crowd is already down at the Capitol, and they breach the outer perimeter of the kind of fairly flimsy, honestly, railings that have been set up around the Capitol. They breach the first fence, and then the chaos starts to ensue. And that's where you start seeing this footage that we've all seen, that I imagine you were watching, even though it was your birthday and you're probably your mouth full of birthday cake, and yet your jaw on the floor at what you were seeing, I imagine.
I called Jack Oliver. No, I don't know if you know who Jack is, but Jack is a dear friend of mine. He was RNC finance chair. He was deputy chief of staff for George W. Bush. Brilliant guy, worked for Jeb, stepped out of things when Trump became president because Jeb did. Said he's going to rush the Capitol. There's going to be violence at the Capitol. And I said, Jack, how's there going to be violence at the Capitol? First of all, the Capitol.
This is America.
Yeah. And how is that going to happen? And by the way, police are going to be ready for that. They'll put down the violence.
Right.
But you know, and I know, that it was 58-1. There was a limited amount of Capitol Police because you live in that city, Katty, and that Capitol building for the average American is fairly accessible. It's the people's Capitol building. And the police there are not anticipating violence on a January winter day 2 weeks before the inaugural, which is exactly what it is. They're not expecting it. Why weren't they expecting it, though? Because there were rumblings. Bannon is saying, we're going to, you'll see what happens on the 6th of January and all this sort of nonsense. Why weren't they expecting it?
And there had been one FBI field report that had come through saying, listen, we're hearing that there's going to be serious violence. But I think the Capitol Police, a bit like me and us other reporters, I mean, I had not been really tuned in to the online chatter. And some of the people were just there for the kind of day out. There's this wonderful guy, a guy called Anthony Joseph Sirica, who was eventually sentenced to 15 days in jail for his role in the Capitol attack. When he was asked if he wished he'd stayed out of the building, he said, well, it might make a good story in like 50 years when I'm a grandfather. I mean, some people really were there for the sort of fun of it. And I think that was the attitude of Washington. That was the attitude of the Capitol Police. That was the attitude of the law enforcement, was that this is just going to be another Trump rally. There'll be some bad guys, but we can handle them. But they realized that they were massively unprepared. And you start to get the pictures now of the police right up against the crowd. They are outnumbered, like you said, the surge of people coming up onto the Capitol. And this is before Donald Trump has even finished his speech. So you haven't even got all of the people there yet. Trump finishes speaking at 1:15. The rest of the crowd now joins all their brothers in arms on the Mall. They walk down from the Mall to the Capitol building. DC's regular police, because you've got the Capitol Police, and then you've got DC City Police. They were called in to help manage what was the kind of football atmosphere is gone. Now you've got full-on anger. There's scaffolding around the Capitol because it was all set up already for the inauguration, and some of the protesters managed to get through the scaffolding. They find a staircase, they get up that, they jump over a fence around the side that was only guarded by a handful of police officers, and they get in initially through the side of the building. Most of the crowd is staying out on the front of the Capitol, but at 1:50 p.m., that's when a riot is declared. And it's at 2:13 p.m. that we see that now famous footage of Trump supporters smashing a window. One of them has grabbed a policeman's shield, riot shield, and they smash the window, and they are climbing through the windows into the Capitol buildings. And it's kind of surreal because you've got the Capitol security video and a lot of the people are filming themselves. So we've got so much footage of this day, and they're going in there with their Confederate flags. By the way, something that didn't even happen in the Civil War, right? I mean, we didn't ever have the Capitol breached in this way, even during the American Civil War.
It was well guarded during the Civil War. Obviously, the whole Union Army was surrounding the Potomac River to prevent anything happening to the White House or the Capitol building, which was still, frankly, being built at that time. But what I don't understand, Katty, and it was always will vex me for the rest of my life. What did those people think they were doing? Mm. So there were, like you said, mailmen. There were bank executives from Wall Street that joined. I mean, you pick any slice of America from blue collar to white collar had shown up with their red, white, and blue bandanas and their Confederate flags.
And a lot of Trump flags.
A lot of Trump flags. What were they trying to achieve? So they thought, we're going to run over the Capitol. We're going to, I guess, hang people that don't agree with us. And then as a result of us doing this, Donald Trump is going to stay in power. He doesn't have the American military. He lost the election. He lost the electoral vote. This was a formulary procedural certification, Katty. This was not anything more than that, just required by Congress to certify the election. So what did he think was going to happen? You know, because I asked some people that actually were there. I said, hey, guys, what do you think? I mean, I don't want to mention the guy's name, but he's a bit of a nut. He's a friend of mine. He's a MAGA guy. He lives out here on Long Island. I said, so, okay, so you're there. Yep, you got in the Capitol building? Yes, I did. Didn't get arrested? No. Well, what do you think was going to happen? What were you doing? Well, we were very angry, you know. And by the way, think about this, and I think you know this. If you really thought your vote was stolen from you, if you really thought this, then I guess there could be a manifestation of anger. But is that the actionable thing? And then what was the outcome? And he just looked at me and said, I don't really know if there was much of an outcome, but we wanted to send a message to people. We weren't expecting necessarily a different outcome.
It's such a good point that it was just, I think people, and there was one guy who was convicted who said we were just American people, tired and pissed off by the fact that we felt our election was stolen. We were just regular, pissed off Americans. Now, some of them were kind of extreme conspiracy theorists. There's one guy who's interviewed who actually starts smoking joints in one of the halls of the Capitol. And he's clearly also a QAnon conspiracy theorist because he's interviewed and he says, well, I'm pissed off because 800,000 children are abducted and tortured and sexually abused every year. And Donald Trump understands this. And I'm in the kind of forefront of the battle against this. I mean, this is classic QAnon mad conspiracy theory stuff. So you've got people like that. You've got people like the guy you interviewed who are pissed off, who genuinely felt, because they had been reading a lot of conspiracy theories and misinformation online, that the election had been stolen. And I guess if you and I felt we had voted in an election and our vote had been stolen and the result had been stolen, we would be angry too. Now, would we storm the Capitol? I would be absolutely terrified to do so because that looked like an incredibly scary scene to me. But I think it's pretty clear what Donald Trump wanted. Donald Trump wanted the certification to stop. And in fact, at 2:24, he tweets, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. So that's at 2:24 p.m. and Donald Trump is not backing down. He's not asking the rioters to stop. And he is again reiterating that he wants Mike Pence to defy his constitutional responsibility and not certify the election.
It's Trump's insurrection. It's Trump's pushing the violence because McCarthy knows, Ivanka Trump knows. Everybody knows Trump can stop it. All he's got to do is take to the airways, but he doesn't do that, Katty.
No.
But I think it's important to point it out.
Donald Trump refusing to pull the rioters back or say anything to pull the rioters back. But let's go inside the Capitol. We've got the rioters who have broken into the Capitol building at this point. But the members of Congress are meeting in their separate sessions in the House and in the Senate to certify the election results. And they don't realize they don't have televisions on the House floor. They don't realize what's happened. And so they're carrying on with business as usual, or trying to. Mike Pence at 2:13 p.m., suddenly in the Senate chamber, the Capitol Police rush in and literally drag him out of his chair, the vice president, to get him and his family to a secure location. A police officer stands up and says, "Don't worry, everybody, we've got the chamber secure." A couple of minutes later, the police officer rushes back in and says, "The situation has changed. The chamber is not secure. All of you have to evacuate right now." 17 minutes later, the Senate is evacuated and all the lawmakers, they're taken to a secret location. And you've got, Anthony, all of these Trump-supporting senators who are refusing to certify the election result, who are suddenly taking a stand and being brave and joining the rioters? What are they doing? What was your thing? Spineless or principled? What are they doing?
They're running. They're running around in the hallways. Josh Hawley had his fist up, stop the steal. Cruz goes to a stop the steal rally in the morning. They're running for their lives. Okay. They expose themselves for who they really are, Katty. But what's going on that I think is very important for people to know, in the White House, calls are coming into the White House, not just to Donald Trump. Pat Cipollone, who is the White House counsel, testifies at the January 6th committee hearings later. He was trying to control the situation. They were trying to say, hey, there's no end game here that this works. Trump is listening to MAGA nut jobs like Stop the Steal Steve Bannon and a group of podcasting crazies who tell Trump all he's got to do is get Pence to overthrow the certification and it'll remand back to the states. And they could push this, they can win this by retallying and redoing the electors. And so Trump believes this. He believes this. And he's now, because he did it to me, he called me a deep stater. I think it was day 9. I got fired on day 11 after I got called a deep stater. But he's telling Cipollone, who I think from the Washington circles, is a dedicated Washingtonian upper crust attorney that wants to follow the Constitution and wants to follow the process. And remember, his job as White House counsel is not to be Trump's lawyer, but he's representing the office of the presidency. And he's telling Trump, you got to knock it off. And Trump stiff arms him, Katty, while this riot, this full-on riot, and this understaffing of the Capitol Police are trying to get the House of Representatives and the senators to safety.
It's so interesting that we can now look back at it with the benefit of the January the 6th committee hearings and the testimony of Pat Cipollone and the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson, who we mentioned in the first half, who was this very brave young woman who was an aide to Mark Meadows. And she tells us that really she's inside the West Wing on that day. And people are going to Donald Trump and saying, look, and to Mark Meadows and saying Vice President Mike Pence is in danger. And Trump just doesn't care, even when his vice president's life is in danger. And these senators are being kind of ushered out through a very narrow corridor. And one of them says, we were 20 feet away from the rioters. If the rioters had just looked the other way and seen that a whole bunch of senators were coming out, who knows what would have happened? Who knows what could have happened to Mike Pence? And I think it is important to point out that Donald Trump was getting these reports and did not care. The Senate has been evacuated at 2:18 p.m. Nancy Pelosi is also pulled out of her chair by the Capitol Police and taken off the podium and taken to a safe location, Fort McNair in Southwest Washington. She originally tried to stay. She didn't want to leave the building, but because of security, she had to get out of there. One of the Democratic members of the Congress at this point, as they realize that the rioters are starting to breach their area, one of the Democratic members of the Congress, yells down to the Republicans, "This is because of you." And the members are getting texts. This is how they know that things are bad, because they're getting texts from their family saying, what are you doing there? Why haven't you left? Are you safe? And they haven't got a television. They're not watching it. They're trying to get on with the business of the day. I mean, it's this surreal. I keep thinking how surreal it was that inside the chambers, they're trying to do business as usual. And And feet away, the rioters are there saying that they want to have some of these people hung and that they want to overturn the election result. So then a few minutes after that, the House floor is evacuated, literally in front of the rioters. The police manage again to secure a very narrow passageway through the rioters to get them out. And one member afterwards says, I could look in the eyes of those officers and I saw the fear. They knew that the officers were outnumbered and they were really scared. You had members of Congress pulling on their gas masks, hiding under the chairs. Some were up on the balcony and had been left there. The floor had been cleared, but the balcony had somehow been forgotten and they were kind of, trying to fend for themselves up there. Finally, at 2:43 p.m., the Capitol Police, who had been guarding a glass door, now leave as the representatives have all been evacuated and the protesters start breaking through the door. And a police officer appears on the other side of that door, pulls up a gun, and when a protester starts to climb through a smashed window towards the chamber, he shoots her. And her name was Ashley Babbitt. She had served 12 years in the Air Force. To your point, that we were saying this earlier, Anthony, that, there were many members of the security forces that were there, former army people, former police officers who were amongst the protesters. These were protesters from all over the country, from all different walks of life. And Ashley Babbitt had been an Obama voter. She'd become kind of radicalized and she died. And she was the only person to die actually at the scene. And I think there's a lot of discussion about the fact that the Capitol police officers and the DC police officers didn't use their weapons more. Because I do think, as I was watching it, thinking, oh my God, this could go. I'm actually surprised not more people were killed in that moment because everybody had arms. Some of the rioters had arms. One of them dropped a gun and a police officer picked it up. The police officers had guns. I think you could have had a really awful situation. Ashley Babbitt was killed, but I think it could have been a lot worse.
Let's talk about the strategy now for lawmakers. The place is under siege. Everyone learns that somebody's been killed, makes the rioters more angry, but it also deepens the concern for the safety, the personal safety of the lawmakers that are there. And so they're talking about evacuating, but a lot of them say, well, wait a minute, we can't really evacuate. We can't give up the Capitol. So, Katty, take us through what these people are thinking. McConnell's now, he's not that emotive of a guy, right? It's not like Mitch Michelini or something like that.
Not sort of like warm and cuddly or fuzzy.
Yeah, no. He's literally...
I don't think anyone would describe Mitch McConnell as that,
He's furious with Trump. He's furious with him. He is absolutely sane with the situation. But like Mitch McConnell is wont to do, nothing. Nothing happens. And so my question to you is why? Why? Why are they so afraid of Donald Trump? Right now, if McConnell, who is principled enough to say, hey, my buddy Joe Biden, who I worked in the Senate with for 4 decades, is president now. He's principled enough to do that, but he's not principled enough to convict Donald Trump in the Senate post this fiasco. So why is that, Katty K?
On that day, members of Congress were uniformly shocked. You mentioned earlier that you had MAGA people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, running in fear of their lives. I interviewed members of Congress on the day as this was all unfolding who were hiding in their offices, literally barricaded themselves in their offices, hiding under their desks. I spoke to a Republican member of Congress, Nancy Mace, newly elected from Georgia. She'd only been in Washington for a couple of days. She had kids and she was absolutely furious, like you say, furious that this was happening, furious that she had come to Washington and within days of being sworn in, this is what she has to deal with. There were members of Congress who were adamant that they were not going to leave the Capitol, who were defiant. Eric Swalwell, member of Congress, Democratic member of Congress from California, who said that my fear is that Trump would say we'd lost control of the Capitol and that we'd abandoned it. And then he said he was worried that Trump would declare martial law and we would never see the certification of the election result. So I think on the day, in the moment, pretty much everyone was afraid. And they were furious. You're right. Mitch McConnell was furious. I mean, they'd had to flee for their lives and they'd had their business stopped. But then this is what was fascinating. Then as the days tick by, to answer your question, the kind of fury and the fear sort of gets replaced by the age-old fear of Donald Trump, I guess. I mean, they have this moment of saying we're going to, stand up against him, and we're angry, and then it kind of dissipates. But we're jumping ahead a little because the rioters, by the way, they are still rioting. Donald Trump has not called them off yet. Some of the rioters are inside. Most of the crowd is still trying to get into the Capitol through what's called the tunnel, which is where the president actually walks out of the Capitol on Inauguration Day every 4 years. And they are up against Capitol police officers who are sort of 6 deep in this corridor. And the crowd, which is thousands, are shoulder to shoulder pushing up against 40 or 50 policemen who are exhausted. They've been battling nonstop for the last hour or so against this crowd. And the crowd keeps sending in people with batons, maces being, sprayed everywhere. The police officers are totally inadequately equipped. One officer, Mike Fanone, was dragged out of the tunnel and into the middle of the crowd outside. He thought he was going to die. He was tasered. He was punched. They dragged him out of the Capitol building, shoved him into the middle of the crowd. He thought that was it. He was done for. And at one point, he's as he's on the floor and he's bleeding, and he suffers traumatic brain injuries because of the kicks and the attacks that he gets. He screams out, "I've got kids." And somehow someone in the crowd finds their humanity and they literally hand him back into the tunnel again. I mean, that was an extraordinary moment, and it's all caught on video. You can see it all. And I've interviewed Mike Fanone subsequently several times, and he is still furious with the Republicans, to what you're saying. He is still furious that they don't acknowledge what happened on January the 6th, that they don't defend the police officers who were there just trying to protect the Capitol and do their job. And he feels very let down by Donald Trump and by the Republican Party.
He's traumatized.
And he's traumatized. He leaves the Capitol Police afterwards. He can't do his job anymore.
He can't function because he's lost something. This is what happens in a war too, right? We lose some of our faith in humanity when we're viciously and violently attacking each other. We drop down into an animalistic.
I think that's what happened. It's sort of animal. It's feral.
Yeah, it's feral. And then result of which we say, okay, wait a minute. I thought of us as a humanity collectively differently. And this is where the trauma comes from. This is where post-traumatic stress comes from, seeing the violence, but also recognizing that we have it in us, Katty. And so he's traumatized. McCarthy is the one I find the most fascinating because he's the one I have the least amount of respect for. And I'm a fully confessed donor to Kevin, 15-year donor, had him at our conferences. He was a young gun. We're both contemporaries. Him, Cantor, and Paul Ryan were supposed to be the future of the Republican Party. But McCarthy only really wants one thing. He wants to be the Speaker of the House, uber alles. He doesn't care about anything else. But he's now furious. He's furious that this commotion's going on. Somebody has died. He picks up the phone. He calls Trump. Can't get him on the phone. He calls Ivanka Trump, and he is blowing up on her. You better get in there. You better get in there and get your father to say something or to do something to stop this riot and stop the violence. So what does he do, Katty?
Well, this has been going on for 2 hours now. The Capitol is breached at 2:15 p.m. And finally, at 4:17 p.m., Donald Trump calls it off. He releases a video after he's been asked, like you say, by Ivanka Trump, and other family members have gone to him and said, "Listen, Dad, you've got to do something." And he releases a video and he says, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anyone hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened. where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace. I mean, Anthony, talk about mixed frickin' messages. You're very special, but go home. The election was fraudulent. It was stolen from us, but we have to have peace. It does the job. The news of this video goes through the crowd. It does the job. They played it over a megaphone around the crowd. And along with reinforcements that are arriving now for the police from the National Guard, because Mark Milley has called them, the crowd starts to dissipate. But I read that video again, the exact words of it, and he has chosen his words super carefully.
So this is the genius, and let me rephrase this. This is the sinister genius of Donald Trump. And so he has figured out, and again, I always tease about the astrology. He's a classic Gemini. There are two people in there, Katty. There's an evil twin, and there's like a mediocre twin. They're in there, okay? And they fight with each other. And he says all the time two diametrically opposed things all the time. And he never gets called out on it. And so it's in that moment, we love you. I was at the Ellipse telling you, stop the steal. You guys came up with the words, stop the steal, march on the Capitol, and tell Mike Pence to do the right thing. Meantime, they're putting nooses up.
Yeah.
And Confederate flags outside the Capitol. They're going to break through the Capitol. And he finally realizes that it's going to cause him trouble. He finally realizes, wait a minute, I've incited the violence. They asked for troop support from the National Guard. I didn't provide it. He backpedals and tries to say that he did to get his supporters on side, but that was 3 days prior. It wasn't during the moment. He's gone silent for almost 3 hours. And classic Donald Trump, he talks out of both sides of his mouth and he gets himself out of the situation. And now he's out of the situation. This is his sinister genius. He pulled the same number in 2024, but he's got people seething at him. But Frank Luntz, the pollster, did you know that he is roommates with Kevin McCarthy?
No, I did not know that. No. Good piece of gossip.
Yeah. So he's roommates with Kevin McCarthy and they live together when they're both in Washington. They share an apartment. Frank's on TV saying Kevin is furious. They're marshaling now. They're going to impeach this son of a bitch. Okay, they're furious. But McCarthy says, ready? Oh, this has finished Donald Trump. Don't have to go the whole way here. We don't have to impeach him in the House and convict him in the Senate. Despite his actions, his damning actions are actually treasonous to the U.S. Constitution. It is actually a Sedition Act violation. But they blink, Katty. They blink. They blink. And why do they blink? Because of ambition, Katty. They blink because of ambition. I got to be the Speaker of the House. I may need Trump's support.
Yeah. I mean, before they blink, however, they do actually get back to business. 8 p.m. that evening, the Senate re-enters the chamber. Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate Democratic leader, gives a speech saying, today's events did not happen spontaneously. The president, who promoted conspiracy theories that motivated these thugs, the president who exhorted them to come to our nation's capital, this mob was in part President Trump's doing, incited by his words and his lies. So Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, lays it very firmly at the feet of Donald Trump. They go ahead with the certification in the House. 147 Republicans vote to object to the results in one or more states. In the Senate, 8 Republicans object to the results in one or more states. Vice President Mike Pence does not attempt to block the certification. He does his constitutional duty. And the Republicans, the traditional Republicans, people like Mitt Romney, even Mitch McConnell at this point, they are absolutely furious, but the certification happens. And I suppose you could say, Anthony, at that moment, at 8 p.m. that night, when they reconvene and they certify this incredibly hotly contested election, the American system holds. the American system of government does what it is meant to do. Is that too optimistic an interpretation?
So I'm gonna say you're a history buff, right? You listen to the rest is history. I'm gonna say a couple things to you. If I say July 4th, 1776, you know what that is.
Independence.
April 14th, 1865, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
At the theater in Washington.
Yes, and the contemporaneous with the ending of the Civil War. Literally, we are killing each other, 600,000 dead, right? If I say December the 7th, 1941.
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, okay? Now, if I say September the 11th, 2001, what about January 6th, 2021, Katty K? It is a stain. The system survives, but it now goes in the pantheon of dates of horror for the average American and for the world. January 6th. When I say to people, hey, Anthony, when's your birthday? I said, January 6th. Oh, January 6th. An atom bomb went off in this country, a desecration to the Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, there are the facts of the day. 140 police officers were wounded. One officer, Brian Sicknick, was attacked and died the next day in hospital. 4 officers took their own lives in the aftermath of January the 6th because of the trauma we were speaking about. Effigies were burned of a Democratic governor in the state of Oregon. Unexploded pipe bombs were found at the offices of the DNC and of the Republican National Committee as well. It was a day of extraordinary violence in the country, and it was a day where the system held, but it only just held. And I think for people watching America, particularly from around the world, and our audiences were tuned in every single country. I don't think there was a country in the world that was not watching in real time or watching the footage afterwards of January the 6th. And people thought, wow, we never thought this would happen in America. The world's biggest economy, the world's biggest military, and this can happen. And I think it has shaken, it has changed forever, potentially, America's allies' attitudes to this country.
Yeah, until you get a different type of leadership in this country.
And that's going to take a while because people will still remember the events of January the 6th. The images are still there.
I know we're going to close out this episode, but I just want to go to the misinformation train for a second. There's a Trump train leaving the station. It's called the Trump train of misinformation. The FBI planted people in the crowd and incited the crowd. And they caused this. This was an inside job, Katty. It went from, these were just a bunch of lovely tourists with their Kodak Instamatic travel cameras. They were taking selfies, innocent tourists. Then it became, okay, a little bit worse, okay. But it was an inside job from the FBI, Katty K. And there's a group of people that believe that in this country. And there's a litany of people. Go on X, punch in January 6th. And the conspiracists are out there telling yarns, fictitious yarns about what happened. But this was a plight on the American democracy. This damaged us. And the question is, can we heal ourselves from it? Now, we've brought back their spiritual leader. He's going to be back in the White House. And the Democrats said, no problem. They invited him into the White House. They said, no problem. They're helping him with his transition. Joe Biden's going to show up at his inauguration. Trump couldn't do that for Joe Biden. Where does this take us, Katty? That's the question.
So January the 6th draws to a close. And despite the riots and the extraordinary trauma that Washington has gone through, the results of the 2020 election have been certified. Joe Biden's going to be the next president. But many people inside and outside of Capitol Hill are furious, and the word impeachment is on their lips. They want to hold Donald Trump responsible. But how can they? What can they do? Join us next Monday to find out. But if you can't wait for then, you can sign up to be a founding member at therestispoliticsus.com to get access to that episode right now.
I love your narration, and I think you're awesome. But you're going to find out how we hold him accountable. But we reelected him as president. But you should still listen next week because we're going to tell you what this crazy SOB does in the aftermath of January 6th.
Yeah. And what we learn in that extraordinary impeachment process. We will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening.